There is a powerful strain of anti-EU sentiment in Britain. But is it enough to turn the anti-EU UK Independence Party into a credible political force in the looming general election? My guest today is UKIP's erstwhile leader, now their most high-profile parliamentary candidate, Nigel Farage. He revels in his role as a troublemaking MEP in Brussels. But can he convince as a serious politician? Nigel Farage, welcome to Hard Talk. How do you transform yourself and your party from the single-issue anti-EU campaign into a credible political party?
Well, we've been doing that for some years, slowly but surely. You know, when you're new in politics, you have to establish yourself as a brand. And I think by coming second in the European elections last year across the entire UK, we have established ourselves. If you don't think Britain should be part of the European Union, then we're the party for you. But of course, as you get bigger, and as the likelihood becomes greater that if we had a referendum on this subject, that the British would opt for a different relationship, then you're right. What people want to know is, how would you run the United Kingdom? Where would you see our place with the rest of the world? And we've been slowly doing it, but you know, it's about evolution. It can't happen overnight.
But the precedent isn't good, is it? Because I was just checking the figures. In 2004, your European election performance was also very strong. You got 2.6 million votes. But the year later, when there was a British general election, you went down to, what, 600,000 votes. You didn't come anywhere near winning a seat in the Westminster Parliament.
That was very different.
Why?
The reason was we'd had a big spike in 2004. We had a couple of big celebrity supporters and backers and candidates. And it took us much further, much faster than we ever thought we'd go, but by the same token, those people also led us to a position where we approached the 2005 election as a party that was split down the middle. It didn't have any money. We were in a very weak position.
I don't recall you saying that at the time, but it's interesting you would confess that now.
Well, no, hang on a second. I mean, you know, at the end of 2004, I admitted very publicly that UKIP had serious problems.
I don't think you ran a campaign in 05 saying vote for the party that split down the middle, but let's leave that by the by, because I want to get to a development of the same point. I've been looking at the polls. I'm sure you have too, because you're standing in the seat of Buckingham here in the UK, and it's difficult to define your support, but you're roughly between 5 and 6% on those polls that bother to measure the UKIP vote. That again, is not impressive, is it?
Well, that would be more than double what we got last time in the general election, so that would be progress, albeit not enough. And also, I mean, bear in mind that those polls also include within them Scotland, where at the moment we're not a very strong party, and the reason for that, of course, is the word independence means something different up there. We are making steady progress, and actually, if you look at those polls, there have been 2 polls in the last week showing others on between 15 and 20%. So you know, that 5 to 6% figure is at the lower end of expectations.
But would you agree, and this again is polling evidence, that in the end Europe is not playing as an issue in the UK general election? If you ask people what they are going to vote on, it's quite clear they're going to vote on the state of the economy, on the arguments about spending and cuts. They're going to vote on what they think will deliver jobs, and Europe isn't on the list.
Well, of course it isn't, to the degree that the Conservative Party and Labour parties will not even talk about the European dimension. Our job is to make people understand that if we talk about the economy, there is a huge link to our membership of the EU. If we talk about immigration, which is number 2 on the list of voters' concerns, we can't have our own immigration policy and be part of the European Union. I mean, goodness me, we've had a big debate in Britain this week about a crazed drug that kids have been taking, and a few have died. We can't even ban that in this country because we have to apply for permission to the EU. So what we're saying to people is, look, the fact the big parties are not discussing this doesn't mean it doesn't matter.
Well, let's unpick it a little bit and let's focus on the economy, because every single poll puts that front and centre of people's concerns. Your manifesto is a pretty extraordinary document, if you don't mind me saying. I mean, we're facing a budget deficit in this country of more than 12% of GDP. The budget deficit is close to £170 billion this year, and you propose to slash taxes for the rich. You want a flat tax of 31% across the nation, which means the rich pay much less
Well, I think
tax.
actually...
Does that make any sense?
I think the salient point of our tax policy is not that. The salient point is we want to raise the level at which people start paying tax to £11,500 a year. We've been campaigning on that for the last 3 years. So, in fact, what we're doing is we're saying to the poorest paid in society, you can work a 35 to 40-hour week on the minimum wage and not pay any tax at all, because the key thing to us is that we incentivise people to get them off benefits.
Yeah, but the point is,
as
soon as the people who are earning modest wages, average sort of wages in the UK, as soon as they start paying tax, they're paying much more tax under your system than they would before.
No,
and they juxtapose that and they contrast that with the rich. The rich will be paying unbelievably less tax than they would under the current regime.
I think you should read it more carefully, because actually what we're doing is abolishing national insurance, which was a con anyway, and rolling that in with income tax. The big beneficiaries of the UKIP tax policy would be the 4 million lowest earners, who would be taken completely out of the tax system. Now, coming to your point about big earners and high earners, you know, what we saw all through the 1970s were Britain's brightest and best young people fleeing the country, going off all over the world, because they weren't prepared to pay very high rates of tax. What we've had with a Labour government, and what we have with the Conservative opposition refusing to oppose, is we're seeing the rich, if you want to call them that, the high earners, paying more and more tax. And the signal that is sending to people is, isn't it time for the entrepreneurial to flee the country?
It's interesting that after we've seen the financial crisis, the financial meltdown, after we've seen the budget deficit spiral out of control, and everybody now concerned about the state of the public finances, that your message is that the rich should pay much less tax. Not only that, inheritance tax, which again massively benefits the rich as opposed to the poor, should be scrapped. There should be dividend tax relief reimposed.
Yep.
All of these measures which seem to be saying to the country, never mind the fact that the disparity between rich and poor is greater than it's ever been, we're going to make it even greater.
Well, our message to the rich is don't leave the country. We want, you know, very bright, hard-working people, successful people to stay in Britain and not to head off to Zurich, off to New York or wherever they're going. And they're going in real numbers. Let's not underestimate the number of high earners and able people that are fleeing these shores.
So inequality higher in the UK now than it's been for a long, long time, and you're saying, doesn't matter to me, we're going to make it even higher.
We're the first political party to put a serious proposal on the table to get people off benefit and back to work, to take 4 million people totally out of taxation. And I tell you, because of that, the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable's party, have almost matched us with those ideas. So actually, we're leading the way. Listen, that alone is going to cost 25 to 30 billion pounds. But the point is...
Yeah, and you're happy to tell me that, given that we do currently face a budget deficit of £170 million a year.
The classic mistake that everybody makes is they think, if we cut taxes, we'll lose revenue. All the lessons from the early 1980s, all the lessons from the Baltic states in the 1990s are that if you cut taxes, people stop evade paying.
Well, Richard Murphy, who's just been running some of your numbers, Director of Tax Research UK, says he doesn't believe your figures can possibly add up. When he looks at your tax policy and your spending policy, it doesn't add up.
Well, the way that it adds up is if we promote growth. You know, all of this was said back in the early 1980s and the mid-1980s, when there were massive tax cuts, if you remember, on income tax. We were told the British economy would lose all this income. Actually, it generated more income. And what we want to do, I mean, on the big economic question, we want to cut the size of the state sector. We want radical cutbacks in public spending, and we want to incentivise private business.
You certainly want radical cuts in public spending, in the sense that you set a target of, what, £500 million you want the government to spend, which is well over 25% less than it is on current levels. Again, the difficult thing for me is that when I go through your detailed proposals on public spending, I see an awful lot of commitments to new spending. For example, major new spending commitments on defence, on prisons, border police, things like that. but very little specific evidence of anything you're going to cut at all. And of course, you're going to have to cut massively to meet this target
Yes,
you've
we
set.
are. I mean, we would have to meet those targets, there would need to be huge cutbacks in quangos.
Something that Britain's never seen before. The Tories and Labour are arguing about cuts which might, in some departments, end up representing a 12 to 15% cut in real terms over the next 3 or 4 years. You're talking about 30 to 35% cuts at least.
That's right. That's
across
right.
the board.
Well, just look at how the state's grown since '97. 850,000 new jobs in the public sector since 1997.
So why does your manifesto say that frontline services, particularly in the NHS, will not be affected?
Well, there are 8 million people working in our public services.
So you can deliver the NHS services without the people?
Of which only 2 million of the 8 million work directly in frontline services. And this really is the great disease within the public sector in this country at the moment, is this massive bureaucracy. Now, a lot of it, of course, is that we have to interpret such a mass of EU legislation. That's part of the problem. We also have our own disease of bureaucracy in this country. And what we're saying is there need to be massive cutbacks, that so much of what is done, so many of these quangos, frankly, aren't needed at all. And what we've got to do when that general election campaign starts is we've got to provide a list of those that we believe need to be acted.